Today I'm going to talk to you about something very special, something I want to say relatively new. You know, in the world of AI, we keep throwing around these new modern terms, but this one is sticking. It's called context engineering. And I have Cole here to help me and you understand that what exactly is context engineering, why should you use it, and how can you use it with Kiro. Cole, welcome to the video, I guess.
Thank you.
Tell me who you are, tell them who you are, what do you do, and tabs or spaces.
All right, sounds good. Well, hey everyone, I'm Cole. I'm an AI developer. I've been really big into AI coding recently, and I teach a lot of stuff on my YouTube channel about building AI agents and running local AI. And so yeah, I'm really excited to dive into Kiro today because I've just been in the trenches, diving deep into everything related to just making AI coding assistants actually work effectively. And context engineering is the big way to do that right now. And it's not something that's like brand new, but it's just like this umbrella term to capture all these things that people have been realizing, like this is what goes into really truly building software reliably with AI, as much as you can with the unpredictability, but like it's insane the kind of things that you can produce nowadays. And so context engineering is also something that's built directly into Kiro, which I'm excited to dive into with their whole spec-driven development. So that's what we're going to be diving into right now.
Amazing. So tabs or spaces?
Oh, I forgot the big question.
Yeah?
Yeah, I do tabs.
Tabs, of course.
Yep.
So tell them, what is context engineering? Why should I care?
Maybe to start off, we can talk about vibe coding.
Okay.
And then
the traditional vibe coding?
Yeah, the traditional vibe coding, and then contrast that with what context engineering really is. Because vibe coding, it's all about diving right into the implementation. Yeah. You go into Kiro or Cursor or Claude Code, whatever, and you just say, build me this.
Sure.
And you're very non-specific. You're just hoping that it's going to walk you through the entire process. It's going to understand exactly what you want, and it's just going to be the silver bullet. Okay. And it never works that way. That's vibe coding. In the end, you always end up with demos that are just going to break when you actually try to go to production, and we all hear those horror stories, right? So what you really need is you need a way to engineer the context, actually treat the upfront planning process with respect so that you can sharpen your axe, so to speak. Like instead of just diving right into the implementation, you spend the time actually creating the requirements, defining the tasks, being really specific about what you want, kind of like what a project manager would do for a typical team of developers, but now you're just doing it for your AI coding assistant. Yeah. Or if you want to get really fancy, your multiple AI coding assistants, which we won't get into that right now, but you can take this really, really far. And that's what context engineering is. It's spending the time up front, something like spec-driven development, which we'll dive into, where you're really like outlining the requirements, building a design document, creating that task list, and like here are the certain epics that we have to get through for whatever we want to build, and then going into the implementation. So you're not rushing into it.
So what's the difference between like spec-driven development and in this case context engineering? Like they sound kind of similar-ish, right? Yep. But like what's the big deal?
Yeah, I would say that context engineering is kind of like a superset. Like spec-driven development is one way to context engineer. Okay. And we'll see what that looks like in a bit. But really, like with spec-driven development, it is the core of context engineering. We go through the process of creating a design document, an implementation plan. We have a task list that Kiro will help us create. That is context engineering.
So let's say I want to build a tic-tac-toe application, right? And I can start with just like in the vibe coding element or just whatever you want to call it, saying I want to build a tic-tac-toe application, and I define it in the prompt, a bunch of other stuff. That's what you would call traditional prompt engineering. Oh my God, we've moved on so fast. That's what we call prompt engineering. How would context engineering look in this case? Like how would, if for my simple request of building a tic-tac-toe application, how would context engineering fit into that?
Yeah, so for something really, really simple like that, it can be a bit harder to say like, okay, this is where you go from vibe coding or prompt engineering to full context engineering. But like, just to like work with this really simple example, it would actually be defining like the technology stack that you want to build your application. Or providing documentation, like if you're using this specific library or whatever, like where are pages that I should go out to the internet, like instructing the AI coding assistant, go out here to do your research and figure out like here are the patterns that I should be implementing. Here are the best practices that I should be following. Defining things like constraints as well is super important. All of that is what goes into context engineering. Prompt engineering is more like, let me just try to be really specific in the way that I word something to tell it what I want in just a couple of sentences. But context engineering is actually kind of like a superset. It's like, okay, what else do we need besides just like our feature requests? Let's give it information for like what it should be researching, how it should be architecting things.
I like that. Okay, so that's definitely kind of introducing a lot more specific, a lot more context into the context window, right?
Right.
Before you actually start asking it what to do. Interesting. Is this would MCPs play a part in that? Like MCP servers, would you have like MCP servers kind of fetch additional context into the initial prompt, or how
Yes.
does that work? Okay.
Definitely. MCP servers are a big part of context engineering.
Okay.
And something I probably haven't even covered enough on my channel so far, but context engineering, it's really the prompting, it's the documentation, the research that your agent is doing. It's also like a lot of RAG and being able to like go look at your knowledge base to figure out like what's this extra context around the business that I should maybe know about from when I'm building an application for you, or like a new feature in existing code base. RAG is also, I mean, really just like web search is a form of RAG. And so like MCP servers for things like accessing a knowledge base or searching the internet, like that's a big part of it as well. And a lot of these AI coding assistants, they have a lot of these features for research built in, but MCP servers still play a big part of it. And there's some that I've heard of, like Claude Taskmaster is a big one that a lot of people use. And it maybe isn't something that we're going to play around with right now, but like MCP servers for task management, they are big for context engineering. MCP servers for research, even like the sequential thinking MCP is one that I've used a lot, where it kind of just like instructs an agent on how to like think through a problem step by step. Like that's a part of context engineering too, because it's kind of helping it build its own context, really.
I like that. I mean, I've been using the ever-present fetch MCP server, which kind of can do a bunch of research for me, can go and search online, so that's a really cool thing. Okay, that's really, but folks, RAG, retrieval augmented generation, just so you know, knowledge bases is when you want additional context through semantic search on a vector databases. I'm going to leave a link to the video in the description down below where you can check a little bit more about vector databases and RAG. Okay, so MCP servers, RAG, that all goes into context engineering. So can you give me an example? How does this actually work? How does this work in real life, like a real life example of a context engineered project you want to build?
Yeah.
So let's go into your little code here.
All right, we'll start from the basics here.
Okay.
And a lot of the things that we're talking about, and we really want to take context engineering far, maybe that'd be outside the scope of this simple demonstration.
Sure.
But I'll actually just start with like the foundation of context engineering is to have really good global rules.
Okay.
And in Kiro, they're called steering documents. So like I have my agent steering right here with my global rules, and this is just an example template that I use for a lot of my projects, just for standard global rules to kind of define things like, let's say, oh, here is how you should write your tests. Here's how you should structure specific code bases for something like an AI agent if you're building an agent. Things like styles and conventions, so telling it how you want to create the code, the kind of style that you want. This is also where you list just like general best practices for coding, constraints that you have for the agent, how you want it to handle documentation and general rules for its behavior. Like these are the kinds of things that you have in a global rule.
Right.
And so this is like the foundation for us.
Sure.
And so I have this already kind of as my starting point.
Okay.
And then we can get into spec-driven development with Kiro. And this is where we really start to see the context engineering play out. And one of the reasons I appreciate Kiro specifically so much. And so what we can do with Kiro here is I can create a new spec document.
Okay.
And I can just enter my idea, like whatever I want to build. So this is like what you would traditionally do with vibe coding, where you just describe at a high level, like what's the feature that I want to implement. Like I want to implement a tic-tac-toe game, right? And maybe we could even just do that.
Let's do that, yeah.
Let's say I want to build a tic-tac-toe game. And so with vibe coding, you would send this into the AI coding assistant. It would just start writing the code right away. But with Kiro, it's going to walk us through in a session here, spec-driven development. And so instead of writing code right away, it's going to help us create some markdown documents. Like here we go. It's helping us create a requirements.md. And so
this is basically the way it happens. It creates these like requirements doc, your typical user stories, and it goes through all the things. Yeah, we have a couple of videos on the channel where you can see this thing in action. But my question here is, like, you know, a lot of people approach spectrum development with just like a prompt, right? In this case, your existing steering doc, right, has augmented Kiro or told Kiro kind of in the way it should create this thing. So can we recognize something in this? Well, maybe not here. Let's move on to the design phase. That's where actually I think we're going to be potentially seeing a little bit more.
I guess one thing I want to mention really quick for the requirements, the way this is context engineering, we're using an AI coding assistant here, like basically right off the bat. But the important thing is, like, we're not diving into the code right away. It's writing out the requirements. And an important thing for context engineering that I really want to emphasize is, like, you should be a part of the process. Like, you as the coder, you need to validate this. And it gives us an opportunity to really make sure that it understands fundamentally what we're trying to build. instead of just going right into the implementation. I mean, that's the advantage that it gives us. And so in this case, let's just assume that this is all good here, but typically you'd be spending a lot more time up front building your global rules, validating the requirements. Then we can move on to the next phase in spec-driven development, which is the design phase. So I'll kick that off now.
Now, what's fascinating about this thing is, so like if you look at the requirements doc, there's no mention of a language, no mention of a framework, none of that. Your steering doc has mention of that. I saw Python there. So I'm wondering, is it gonna do Python? We will see that. So I like it, and that's really, really great here. Okay.
Yeah, and I hope it does Python. That's what I'm going for here. So we'll see once it creates the design document.
Even though we call this like spectrum development, this is all part of context engineering. So it's basically pre-generating context before you get into any sort of code, right?
Exactly. Right. Yep. Yeah, and we're using a large language model to help us engineer the context. And context engineering, it takes many shapes and forms. And so sometimes it can be like us just manually creating all of these documents. But that is so tedious. Like that's what we're doing here is taking out that tedious part of it and like still validating things, but using a large language model to speed up the process a lot.
And I do see Python.
Yep. There we go. We got some references of her .py files. Yep.
Can we compare your global rules to some of the things that happen here? Like, what are some of your elements of your global rules that you recognize beyond Python?
Yeah, let's see. So I mean, I'm not super specific. This is like a very dumbed down version of my global rules, just to have something smaller to work with. But let's see if I can think of anything.
Use Python, follow PEP8, Pydantic.
I mean, probably something here like Pydantic for data validation. We'll see if Pydantic's mentioned a lot, which, by the way, the only reason that I am okay using Python with AI coding assistance is because of Pydantic. Otherwise, it's like you should be using TypeScript or Rust or something.
Shout outs to Pydantic.
Yep, that's right. Pydantic is incredible.
My lukewarm take, and I've been saying this a lot, people should potentially choose a different language when using LLMs. It's easier, it's safer, or just use Pydantic.
Right, use Pydantic, right, yep. Let's see, I don't know if there's a mention.
There's a bunch of classes. Okay.
I mean, the data class,
sure. Okay.
That's Pydantic. So it knows what I'm talking about. Like it's making everything type safe as much as you can with Python with Pydantic right here. So there we go. We got that in our design document.
And I had the exact same discussion with Jack. A link to that video in the description as well. How to approach spec-driven development, right? And do you just go all blast and just create this big old requirement and just like do the whole application without any sort of guidance? We actually came to the fact like, no, create steering docs, give it a little bit more guidance before it actually goes and starts generating code.
Right.
Amazing. Now, what else belongs in context engineering? Like I see steering docs are here. We see specs being created. Maybe you could give me or give them a little bit tips. What should we put in our larger context when creating applications from scratch, or even better yet, when building upon existing applications?
Yeah, that's good. So I would say building upon existing applications is actually a lot different than starting something from scratch. But context engineering can very much apply to both.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'll just speak to both really quick here. So when you're starting a project from scratch, there's a few like really key pieces of information that I love to have within my context for context engineering. The first one I find this to be really powerful, telling it somewhere in the documentation, and again, you can use large language models to help you create this kind of stuff, the desired code structure. Like where it actually will like have the code tree. Yeah. That'd be so cool if I could show an example right now, but it could actually have the code tree here of like, here's our test folder, then we got these tests, and then here's our agents folder. We have these agents, we got the agents, we got the prompts, we got the tools.py, right? And then like here's our config folder, here's how we're managing our environment variables. Like having all of that is so powerful. And I find that these tools like Hero and others like Cloud Code, for example, like they very much can follow that, and like the output, what I get at the end actually matches the code structure exactly. So that's one big thing. The other thing I'd say in general that's really big for our context here is to tell the AI coding assistant what to research. And also, like, if we can give it examples, like here are things from past projects we've worked on, or like code snippets we found online. Like here's everything that we want you to load into context before you start coding. So like going out to, like if I'm building a tic-tac-toe game and I've got my Pydantic for validation, like maybe actually pulling some things from the Pydantic documentation, bringing that in. And then I like to have like an examples folder where I'll have like past projects where I've used Pydantic for validation. Just keep using that as an example. So we pull in that as well. So we have all this context up front and we're telling it exactly what to pull in our, I mean, maybe that belongs in our design document. I don't know exactly where that would go, but just one of these markdown documents that we have at the start of spec-driven development. And those are the things that are so good. And then also just like general patterns and pseudocode is really useful as well. Basically, the document should tell a human, like step by step, here's how you'd build something, here's what the pseudocode looks like, and then the AI coding assistant is going to work really well off of that. So if I just think about like how would I tell a person like here's exactly how to develop something. And like pseudocode is really helpful. I mean, you see that all the time. Like you just do the same thing for an AI coding assistant. Like I said at the start, a project manager, but instead of for a development team, it's just for an AI coding assistant. That's exactly what we're doing here.
Exactly. So one of the things that I want to point out to folks here, there's a big difference. Well, there's a difference between a design doc and your context engineering steering doc. Steering doc applies in most cases globally. Of course, they're all local, but in this case, it's a global set of rules that your project should follow. Your design doc is specifically for this specific implementation. No, sorry, not even implementation, this specific feature you're trying to build.
Right.
So if you want to add a feature, not the whole application, if you're trying to add a feature that adds off, the design doc will only do that. So your design doc is potentially useless beyond that specific feature, but your context engineering, global rule doc, whatever you want to call it, steering doc, is the thing that's going to be apply best practice across any amount of features you want to build.
Right. Yep. Yeah. The key thing with that is you can actually use a design doc from a previous feature or like the start of the project and have the AI coding assistant reference that to know exactly what you're looking for to help you build another design document for another feature. And that I guess I didn't really speak yet to using context engineering for existing code bases. So that's kind of what we're getting into now,
let's talk about that.
Which is perfect. Yeah, because basically you do all of the same things, but just much more simplified. Because instead of having to describe a project from scratch, you now are just using in the existing code base to develop like a smaller feature, like you're just building a new feature. And so instead of referencing documentation from the internet and that examples folder that I talked about earlier, it's more like calling out specific parts of the existing code base to look at things like existing patterns and best practices that you're following. So it's a lot more just like referencing things internally. And then your design documents and things like all of that's going to be a lot smaller because it's going to be more hyper-focused now versus a lot of what I've been talking about is like when you start something from scratch, there's usually a lot more context that you have to give it.
And I like what you mentioned here, like using like a code tree, like the way you structure. So I have a certain way of building my own Rust application. And I have a way of building it. I use a specific set of crates. I use a specific way of parsing the arguments. And I build a lot of command line applications. The weird thing is, like when you go to Coding Assistant to Kiro and I ask it to build me this, it will most of the times choose a different approach. Like it's going to say, oh, well, you know, I'm going to keep it in a TOML file and this, no, I'm going to YAML file. So I like to give it like, here's an example project, how I love to do my things. Now, I would probably distill that project instead of giving it the whole repo because a lot of stuff, so maybe a code tree, and then tell it like this. Or like, here's my utilities file, here's my configuration file, check it out and replicate this, not functionality, but replicate the same spirit of the way I built that project into this new one. So, okay, so that's a very, like I haven't thought about that, but that is context engineering. Like I've been doing that.
And that's exactly what I'm talking about,
I love it.
And what you said is exactly what I always do. Like you tell it to look at these examples for your inspiration to your structure, but don't copy it exactly. Like you still want to give it some creative freedom so it doesn't just like hammer out exactly the same thing. Like it has to understand how to adapt, but like, you use the examples as your foundation of like, these are the best practices and patterns to follow. Yeah,
this last weekend, Kiro shamed me a little bit. I was building this command line utility to transcribe files, doesn't matter. But I pointed it like, here's an example of a file uploader I used to in the past. There's a progress bar. Use that as inspiration. And it's looked at it, it's like, oh, you did this wrong. I'm like, okay, sorry. Like, there's a better way to do it. And I'm like, sure. And then it did it in a better way. But at least it found the way, and then I had to go update my application. But yeah, I like that. So we talked about global rules, spec-driven stuff, maybe like code, template, architecture, things that we love to use. Is there anything else that you feel like should be critical to your context engineering workflow as a developer?
I think that's everything that I have in mind, but I feel like there's something else that you wanted to mention.
Having worked with teams that like in the multi-developer teams, right? People who just work with 10 to 15 people. One of the great things about adding into your context engineering element is adding certain rules and best practices when developing within that organization. Right? So like imagine you have an organization of 20 developers, but you have to follow this specific way of implementing auth, or you have to follow this specific way of building a test or changing a make file, whatever. those things should come into, those things actually come into context. So your LLM, your coding assistant, has a little bit more knowledge before it goes into design docs. Now, those can be huge. Is it part of the context itself? I think there's a better way to do it through like an MCP and a RAG, so you can kind of be selective about it. But it is one of those things that is going to be critical for like big teams to kind of maintain consistency when following certain company rules, right?
Right.
So any other parts of the context that you think is going to be important? Like we have specs, we have those like global files. What else do you think context should be, context should include with developers? Like what kind of the things instructions you want to give an LLM?
Right, that's a good question. Yeah, one thing that we've kind of already been talking about a little bit, but I want to hone in on more, is task management. I think that task management is such a huge part of context engineering, because you tell your AI coding assistant the best practices and the constraints, the things that I feel like I repeated 10 times already. But the other thing that's important is to also talk about like how do you go about managing the tasks for your project. And this applies both to implementing features in an existing code base and starting something from scratch. You have these larger tasks that you have to create, and you want to split them up into subtasks, describing to the AI coding assistant how to mark off these tasks and document what you did. Like all of that is just so important.
And kind of like to this same point, I want to just add to this for both you and the folks out there. One of the things I've heard and been experiencing working with bigger teams is that the way bigger teams use coding assistants, Kiro, is they have this whole nother things they need to add to context engineering. So in a big team of 15, 20 people, there are certain rules you need to follow. Like they're not individual rules the way I like my code. It's like, here's a official company way how we implement auth, or here's an official company way how our log should look like. So you see these teams have like a complete, like a laundry list of rules and requirements for certain applications, and they can either stick them, most of them in the context, or use something like semantic search with RAG. So that's another element, especially when working in big teams. Do not sleep on context engineering in big teams because you don't want 20 developers kind of just producing 20 different types of code. And so incredibly important. Amazing. Well, I've learned a lot today, my friend. Like I've heard the term context engineering, like, oh, how does it all work? But I'm happy to see how it applies to your workflow and how you've been applying it. Folks, you should definitely go check out context engineering, how you can augment your Kiro usage with excellent context, with additional rules, and even maybe some MCPs to get you data. But if you've enjoyed this video, there's a big old like button somewhere underneath our faces here. You should go and click it, or not. If you want more videos like this, there's a subscribe button as well. Go check out our channel. There's a bunch of videos around Kiro and the future of software development. Definitely go check that out. You should go check out Cole's channel. We're gonna leave a link in the description. He has a video about context engineering where he explains this a lot more. So if you want more context, hey, you can check out that video. My name has been Darko. That's been Cole. We'll see you in the next one. Go try out Kiro.